A few weeks ago, our teenagers asked if we could start a new study on David. And so that was right before all of our lives got turned upside down. And so I wanted to go ahead and just follow through with that. And I want to create several small video lessons. And we're just going to look at the life of David in very small chunks. And so each lesson will just take a look at another part of David's life in 5 or 10 minute segments. So I hope that you will join us on this journey of looking at David's life. These lessons will be geared towards our teenagers and also maybe your preteens and older children, but really anybody can join in on this journey. So I hope you'll be excited. Let's dive in and see how we're going to start this journey and look at David's life. I can remember this activity that we did in my youth group growing up when I was a teenager, and my youth minister called it the cross. And he had this very simple cross, very similar to this one, and he would bring it in and we'd all sit around in a big circle, and he would tell us that he would give the cross to one of us, and we would basically have to pass the cross to someone else. But before we could pass it, we would have to tell something special about that person and why that person meant something special to us. And that was always a very special time in the life of our youth group. It was often a time that we grew really close together. And so we really treasured that time. It was a time when a lot of tears were shed. But I remember one time when our youth minister, he announced that we were going to do the cross on a Sunday night with the entire church. Well, you guys, this scared me because my family did not come to church on Sunday nights. They didn't come to church on Wednesday nights. I was the only person in my family that came any other time other than Sunday mornings. I was the only person in my family who was actually a member of our church. And so I was sitting here and I had not been in this church very long. And I remember that the youth group all sat together. The ones that came, we all sat together, and we all knew what the cross was, but a lot of the people in the church didn't know. And so we all came equipped with like Kleenex. In today's age, we may need to bring a roll of toilet paper with us, but we all came and we're sitting there and we start the cross. And so here's the cross. The cross is going all over the church. It's going all around. And I sat there just on the edge of my seat. I was very young and I had not been in this church very long, and I sat wondering if I was ever going to get the cross. And y'all, I didn't get the cross. And it was breaking my heart. I was on the edge of tears. Like every time somebody got that cross, that I thought, oh, they might give me the cross, and then they gave it to somebody else. It would just almost just break my heart. And I just thought, there's nobody here to give me this cross. I'm not special enough to anybody here to give me this cross. And so towards the end of the service, my youth minister, he got the cross, and he ended up giving me the cross. And I'll never forget what he told the church. He said, I want to give this cross to a young girl here, and her name's Lisa. And the reason why I want to give this to her is because she has shown that she has a servant's heart. She's always willing to help in whatever we need. And you guys, that was the first time that I had a glimpse into realizing that it didn't matter of what's on the outside. It didn't matter that my family wasn't really important in this church. It didn't matter that I wasn't raised in this church, and it didn't matter that I wasn't very popular. He saw what was on the inside, and he brought that out. And that meant so much to me And it was the time that I needed it the most. Because from that day forward, I realized that my number one goal should always be, you have a servant's heart. That what's on the inside matters so much more than what's on the outside. Well, today we're going to start our study on David. And our study on David actually starts with Samuel. And Samuel is going to go and anoint David as being the king. And he is going to learn a lesson from God, Samuel is, that what is on the outside doesn't matter, but what is on the inside does. So let's dive into this Bible study. Our journey with David actually begins in 1 Samuel chapter 16, where we see that Saul is king over Israel. But in verse 1, we see that God has actually rejected Saul as king over Israel for lots of different reasons, for different things that he has done against God. And so God tells Samuel that he wants him to go to Bethlehem and he wants him to find Jesse. So here's Jesse, and just a side note, don't judge me on my choice of characters for these slides. I have limited Bible characters, or Bible-looking characters, maybe I should say, to choose from. So here's Jesse, and but God tells Samuel, I've chosen one of Jesse's sons to be the next king, and so I want you to go find Jesse, and I'm going to tell you which one of his sons. So that's what Samuel does. He goes to Bethlehem, he finds Jesse, and he says, Jesse, I want you to bring all of your sons, and I want you to come to a sacrificial ceremony that I am going to have, and God has chosen one of your sons for a special purpose. Now, he doesn't tell him what this purpose is, but he wants him to present his sons to him. So the first son that comes out is Eliab. Now, Eliab turns out, he must have looked kingly to Samuel, because Samuel says, surely, this must be the next king. But in verse 7, God tells Samuel, he says, but the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And this is probably one of the most important parts of this lesson, and that is just for us to remember that, the inside in our character and the things that are in our hearts matter so much more than what man sees on the outside. And so that was even a lesson that Samuel, who was a man of God, had to learn. And so Samuel says, no, that is not, Eliab is not the person. And so Jesse starts bringing out the rest of his sons. So here they all come. Yeah, this very interesting looking crew of boys starts coming out. And Samuel is really confused, because one by one, as they all come out, God is telling Samuel, no, none of them. I've not chosen any of these. And so now Samuel's really, really perplexed, I imagine, because, these were all of the sons that Jesse has presented. And so he actually asked Jesse, he says, so are these all of your sons? And he says, well, no, actually there's one more, but he's out tending to the sheep. I've got David. And so lo and behold, he says, go get David, go send for him. And so here we have David. Now, I think this is a very interesting thing to note here, is that David was so insignificant in his own father's eyes
that he wasn't invited to this sacrificial ceremony. But God saw things totally differently. God had something totally different planned for David's life. And so again, we see that what man sees on the outside, God sees totally different. So keep that in mind, because that is going to come out over and over and over again through these lessons. And so when Samuel sees David, God tells him, yes. He says, that is the one. And so in verses 12 and 13, the Lord said, this is the one, anoint him. So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. And I think that's really something we should remember, is that, that one thing is that the Spirit of God just came powerfully upon David from that day on. God had chosen him and set him apart. And this began the time when David began to be really being formed for the purpose of leading God's people in Israel. And so this begins our amazing story with David. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with David in the days to come.
So in today's lesson, we saw that David was anointed for the purpose of being the next king. But David didn't even know that that was the reason why he was being anointed. His brothers saw him being anointed. His father saw him being anointed, but they did not know what this purpose was. Samuel did not tell them what this purpose was. And, I have to wonder what they really thought was going on. But it does say that God, from that moment, came and dwelt within him and began to work in David's life and in his heart in a miraculous way. Well, it works the same way in all of us. Before we were ever born, God knew exactly what we were going to do and what he had a purpose and a plan for each one of us. So we just have to be faithful and try each day to grow closer to God and to try to get closer to what God wants us to do and what he is calling us to do in his ministry. So that's all for today. Next time, we're going to see what God has planned for David as David enters into Saul's life. So it's going to start getting interesting. Hope to see you then.